Hey, Jamie. How's it going? And hey,
I'm
Evelyn.
doing good, but we also have an extra guest, Kurt. So
Well, yeah. Give me a second here. Thank
I
you.
want to know how old that last picture in the
It is. When was that? That was
frame was.
conference
2018.
18.
Yeah,
Okay, that's not that old.
2018.
I know.
Yeah, so that's 20. Yeah, so that was New York, and um, and we included it. It's sort of like our own little like Easter egg of that's the conference we both decided we were going to do this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
The inspiration struck us at some late hour in New York. And yeah. So that's a good memory. Good memory to have. So.
But you guys go back much further than 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do, yeah, but not the podcast. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
met.
I was
we
trying to
met
remember the first time I met you all.
Is the Young Architects Forum, our time on the forum. And let's see, I think I was on a year before Jamie got on, which was, so I was like 13, and then Jamie was 14, I think. And then Evelyn, when were you chair? Do you somewhere in there? You're adult.
I want to say 2017.
Yeah, because I did
2018.
2 terms, so
Mhm.
that got me a little extra time on the committee.
And then I was a communications director before I was chair.
Oh yeah.
So, because we do all the formalities really proper on the show.
Sorry, I did jump in though. So
No, you
that's on
jumped
me.
in. You're an old friend, so you're totally allowed to do that. And it's clear everybody's got some drinks in hand. So, Evelyn, would you like to introduce yourself briefly, as well as the coffee that you may or may not be drinking right now?
Oh, good thing you said may or may not. I'm Evelyn Lee. I work at Slack Technologies. I have my own podcast that has not been running as long as Coffee Sketch, called Practice Disrupted, that launched in 2020, June of 2020. And now I'm not going to know how to pronounce this, but it's roasted matcha. So it's like hojiku. Oh, I'm not going to be able
No,
to
it's okay.
pronounce it.
It's okay. Pronunciations, we make fun of it all the time on the podcast. Kurt constantly corrects me.
It's like it's HOJ something. And I'm coming off of being sick, so I'm gonna blame brain frog right now. But it's not tea. It's roasted matcha. And the interesting thing about the roasting process is it actually eliminates the caffeine, but you still get to, it keeps all the qualities of matcha.
Oh, yeah. I'm kind of learning a little bit about it, or I'm curious. I'm curious because of Argentinian football players. They love the matcha and varying degrees of different caffeinated and non-caffeinated beverages. So I have been learning new terms of late, and so a lot of them have it in a very specific cup with a, I don't know.
Oh, sure.
I have not tried it. Clearly not, because otherwise I'd be more intelligent about it. But
yeah, and apparently only I get demerits for not drinking coffee.
Yeah.
Oh no! So I have a demerit now?
No. Today he's
But I'm the one Jamie picks on. But I have coffee, because otherwise, yes, I'd be teased beyond belief. But
no.
But do you know what you're drinking?
I tease about the decaf. There's not a reason to buy decaf. If we're gonna buy coffee, we're gonna buy coffee. If we're gonna get something different, then we're gonna get something different, and that's okay, because that's a new thing. Yeah, you can tell D about that.
Although, is it like that whole whipped coffee thing? Isn't it like decaf instant? Like it has to be decaf instant or something? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The whipped coffee with the. Anyways, it's like a Korean DeLonghi coffee. Anyways, I digress. I'm
That
sorry.
sounds
Okay,
fun.
that does sound fun. Yeah,
We
we've
around
decided-
here in Flint.
Yeah, there's like
we have
some thing that we're about to like try and do just so that we sound more intelligent about coffee. But and I keep interrupting.
we've already got
because it's
tons
fun.
of homework.
Like it's partly because of the screen thing. I feel like I can interject. Like
On either side.
yeah. All right,
Yeah,
buddy. What's the coffee? I saw you grinding it before we got on. So
yeah, we've it's kind of funny. Yeah, the technology, we've been experimenting with new things this season, and so far we've only had the two of us on. Now we have three people, and so the screen is now, the real estate is definitely constrained. And now Jamie's playing the little devil in between. But well, I actually, so a couple episodes ago I was drinking some Starbucks Italian roast, which is a very dark roast, and then I said I should test this against. There's a local roaster here, Rootless Coffee, in Flint, and they have a flavor or a profile they call dark, which is their dark roast, and it's got a raven. Well, if we got to catch Evelyn up, but I've done some work actually for the Rootless guys, designing some space for their roasting
and there's a
machine.
rumor that we might get our own coffee bag and brand and blend. But that,
well, then you better kind of you need to learn how to sell it a little bit better, Kurt.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh well, I mean, it doesn't. I talk about their stuff all the time. But yeah. So their dark is better than the Starbucks Italian roast by far. And yeah, so that's what I've got going on today. And it's definitely not decaffeinated. I can tell you that much. And so how about you, Jamie?
No, well, since I knew that you were going to get I was hoping you'd get the Rootless Dark. But so I went ahead and got the Grackle from Little City. So Little City is the Austin roaster that it's sort of like my go-to local. There are a bunch of good local roasters, but they're great. And the Grackle is sort of emblematic of like the city of Austin, and it's like weird little raven-looking birds. So yeah, it's a dark roast as well, but it has more of a chocolatey flavor to it. And there's I couldn't put my finger on it, and I finally read it on the bag, so I could like, what's that other thing I'm tasting? It's almonds. So they have sort of it's more of like a chocolate and almond kind of flavor. So it's nice.
So do they roast the almonds with the coffee beans?
No, it's just sort of, that's the note from where they're getting. Yeah.
Oh, from wherever it's grown.
Mm-hmm. And they're pretty good about sourcing their beans. But the Grackle is kind of they've grown into a bigger kind of operation, but the Grackle is sort of their mainstay, original one of choice.
Got it.
Often in care packages that I sent to Flint, just in case I'm worried about Kurt's caffeine consumption. So
yes, I have had my own Grackle. It's very good.
There was an embargo for a little while where he wasn't sure if he was able to go get coffee, and so we took care of that.
Yeah.
Not sure if you can get your own coffee.
Well, the pandemic, even involved like porch pickup from a neighbor. It's desperate times.
That's true.
Desperate times, but those days are past us now, for the most part. So, oh, Jamie brought back an old memory that I hadn't thought about in quite some time. But oh, thanks. So, what we've been live for a few minutes now, and so
see, Evelyn, like this is the evolution of you know, your all's podcast. Can you tell us a little bit, just a little? I mean, you guys, I looked at the numbers because we do sometimes look at our co-conspirators in the podcast architecture realm just to see where they are, make sure we're not falling behind too badly. But you guys have like 110 episodes. How does that How does that feel? And talk a little bit about you and your co-host. I mean, because she's a friend as well. So
Yeah, we have 110 episodes. I don't know. 100 seemed like such a hard number, like I don't know, a big number, I guess, when we started. You know how you kind of need to decide how you're going to number your episodes, like, and how many leading zeros you want? Did you guys have this conversation too?
We've dealt with it. We haven't talked about it much, but we did. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Kurt internalized that conversation and then told me about it later.
Well, I
So,
had the opportunity to like renumber everything
yeah, we did do that. Yeah.
as this thing kept going. I was like, wait a minute, I'm out of zeros.
So I think like 3 zeros seemed like way too many for us. So we're like, we 2. So hitting 100 was a pretty big thing. And then we started when we were with our original producer Gable, we're like, we'll just do 12 episodes and see where it goes. So it's been interesting to see it evolve. So it's called Practice Disrupted. It's Janine and I, and we always have a guest on. So sometimes often they're good friends. We actually talked to Ilya Azaroff earlier this week, so that'll come out in 2 weeks. Let me hear my kids. They just came home.
It's okay. Like the background noise for us is like
it's part of it all.
Yeah, it's part of it all. Sometimes the neighbors just decide, right now is the perfect time to mow the yard. So
yeah, yes,
it happens.
Or work on the motorcycle.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so no, it's the idea is to have these very forward-thinking conversations about architecture. So individuals and firms in traditional practice that are doing interesting things. So I can think of Diana Nicholas from SOM Architects based out in Boston, right? She has unlimited PTO, which I think most architect firms hear that and they're like, wait, what? How do you manage unlimited PTO? That's ridiculous. But she does. So firms that are doing things a little bit differently, architects that have left the profession and are doing other things. We brought on a set designer from Disney. So I think she's still working on a lot of the Boba Fett series. So that was really cool. Oh, thanks, Kurt, for that plug. So, but yeah, and then we just talk about how can we move practice forward, and it's usually Janine and I are kind of business operation geeks and like leadership and professional development. That's kind of where we live. So we talk about a lot of that too.
Well, yeah, and I was there's one of your recent episodes I do want to talk about, but before I do, and ask more probing questions about it, yeah, this kind of maverick architecture thing to us, Kurt and I were talking about it sort of in advance of having you on, and one of the things that oftentimes we'll casually refer to it kind of as we're talking about our experience as architects and doing what we do and coffee and art and all that is sort of this big tent idea. And some of it for me stems from when I was back in college and not necessarily knowing I wanted to be an architect until probably my 3rd or 4th year. I mean, I didn't go to architecture school like out of the gate. I transferred or switched majors my first year. So, but around my 3rd or 4th year, I kind of realized that architecture was certainly the tent or the profession that was going to at least give me some latitude to do the things that I thought I was good at and that I was interested in. But it was part of the study of these other architects that were, amazing designers, different thinkers, problem solvers. And I had a professor who was kind of creating a seminar at the time, but it never kind of materialized. But she shared with me, she's like, yeah, there's all these architects or these people who have, been trained as architects can't call themselves architects at that time, but are doing amazing things in all these other industries. And so their education, is the thing that they always go back to. And the point that sort of stuck with me when she talked about it, and then another professor there that kind of spoke about it in the same way, was this idea of those people who've been through what we've been through, and aren't in practice, in traditional practice, whatever that really means. They usually love architecture at their core. Like,
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, they're probably the best patrons of architecture, if we were talking about patronage. But, as if we're looking for allyship, that to me that's the group that, if we, kind of switch the script, that's the group that, we probably
that's also the group we oust right now, right?
Yeah, that's the one where you're like, no. It's like, and so for us, Kurt and I sort of approach it a little differently, but I think that that's something that I appreciate when I listen to you guys talk to people and kind of get at their stories. The one I was thinking about was your most recent one with Melissa Daniel, for Architecture is Political. But is that something as a topic that you guys have touched on before? I didn't recall you sort of looking at the professional relationship to that, because I know she's kind of changed her trajectory just slightly, but it's there's reasons why I bring her up, but in that podcast, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, she has her own Architecture is Political podcast, right?
Right.
And she had us on that conversation talking about, she was literally like, y'all, help me understand AIA and what the AIA does.
Right.
So that was like us on her podcast. And to be fair, Janine had listened to a lot more of, I'm not a big podcast listener. I hate to admit it. But Janine listened to a lot more of her library and her catalog than I had. And she had woven in this really, her story of how she became an architect and, and how she was inspired by her childhood to do so. And it wasn't like, it was kind of a rough place to grow up in. But no, it's not something that we tend to cover directly. And I'm trying to step carefully here. Politics is not something that I talk with, for instance, with my parents a lot, because as soon as we open that door, I feel like ears start to close.
Right.
So we want to make sure we're covering topics that everyone can kind of really grab onto and move the profession forward. But the truth is, if you look at the history of architecture and zoning codes, and every building you build, you have to submit to, follow codes and submit to a building permit. So inevitably there is absolutely political history with architecture. I think we just tend to focus on, okay, rather than looking back, we are where we are. How do we move forward from here? And that's where we focus. And even I would say some of this conversation that we're talking about with Ilya in the future talks about how to get money from the federal government to support more regenerative buildings, right? So inherently, that's also making architecture political too.
It really is. Yeah, I mean, because I think that's, and I think for me, it's not that it's the political act, but it's the advocacy beyond. And I think Melissa sort of made mention of it. She's like, there's always sort of these like two camps when she was sort of talking about the profession and the institute, and the cool kids, or the part of the profession, whatever that means, that really wants to focus on design and sort of, and whatever that traditional practice that's not traditional, but that sort of focus solely on design as the be it and end all. And then, but then when the design, what I thought was sort of interesting, and you guys didn't go there, but it's something that Kurt and I will oftentimes say is, design, like you just said with Ilya, it brushes right up against all of these, pressing current topical things that are either research related or, life and culture and community. And, that it's not that we're trying to design ourselves out of it, but at the same time, we have to be able to be knowledgeable about it.
You have to be contextually aware, right? Even when you're building a single family residential, yes.
There's a level of advocacy in our work inherently just because of the work that we do.
Right.
We're building things that take a long time, and there's a lot of people and players involved in it. And then, ideally it's going to have a lasting influence, on not just our clients, but the reason why I'm in more the public sector now is that the projects that I really particularly enjoyed were ones that had a broader impact than just the site that it was sitting on. And so, having that, and then the education aspect of my job now, like I'm able to design, but I'm also able to educate at the same time, sometimes surreptitiously in the process, where you're bringing other things to the table and people don't kind of realize because they've asked for consulting services.
Right.
And I think Kurt's seen that even in his transition from his firm to sole proprietorship, is that there's a level of education that he wasn't necessarily doing at his previous practice that he's particularly good at.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, I wonder. I didn't really expect to bring up, get into the political aspect, but my only point to that is that it does seem kind of sad at that the topic alone has become such a contentious one when our country has to run on something, right?
Yes.
But then it's kind of diverged into, I don't know what the right word is, but it's become this kind of hot button thing when it really is when it boils it down, it's supposed to just be the operating system for the country and not necessarily like something to fight over. But
well, yeah, I'm in Texas, right? So if I'm going to a small community to work on a building and we're talking about, oh wow, how did you guys handle that big winter storm? It's like, well, where do you think the big winter storm came from? And so there's some climate responses. I don't mention it as climate responses or resilience, but that's what we're doing. And
you're managing for that without, right. In either case.
And so for us as professionals, then we have to be cognizant of it and start to fold that into our work. Carl kind of made the statement that everybody kind of goes back to, Carl Elfont, when he said, the greenest building is the one that's already there. And so for me, it's like, as a historic preservationist or a preservation architect now, so many times that camp of preservationists and sustainable designers or green builders or, lead architects, they were sort of seen as sort of opposing forces, but it's not, that's the complete opposite, situation to what, reality is. We understand that, but it's, I think that to me is the political aspects of stuff, kind of pulling it out and really kind of talking about it, because it changes, because I think it goes back to your podcast that you guys are focused on, where it's how is practice changing and how are all these external forces changing it, and then how are the people inside it conversely changing it, because of their own reactions to it.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, I wonder too, not sorry, Evelyn, but interrupt, but with my current, in tandem with working for myself, I do teaching at the university, Lawrence Tech University here in Michigan, and I find it very interesting now to engage with these future architects because, in the same way about the future of the profession is like, what are these graduates, your future graduates, like, what do they want out of architecture, right? The way they perceive what they're going through in school, it still by and large has a lot of the the the, the workflow or the tradition that the three of us have gone through, and then our predecessors. So it doesn't change in academia as fast either than say like the profession and academia are moving forward, but maybe not as fast as say like the generations are wanting it to. And anyway, so I do kind of try and check the pulse of my students from time to time on like aspects that intrigue them more than say the components of the education that I enjoy. Because if we can't, we have to. My point is we have to kind of adapt as well to who is going to come into the profession to
Mhm.
maintain that relevance as well, right? It sort of spans all the way from say the generations that are retiring all the way down to the people that are thinking about architecture school and the profession and why they would want to go spend this money on a degree in this particular avenue of education. And so um, it's sort of a sense of stewardship too, really. You want them to gain what they a value out of this this proposition of going to school for 4 to 5 6 years plus. So yeah, so I mean I don't really have the answer because it does vary from cohort to cohort, or the classes that I teach. But it definitely has been exciting to be able to have that opportunity, at least to like kind of engage with some of the younger people in the profession. I this is I hate to say that I have done this, but I have used the term, when I was your age, I did this. I never thought I would ever say that sort of thing, but here we are.
Well, I
I
mean,
do. No, go ahead.
can you talk to like that whole future thinking? Because I know that was something that when you were looking at YAF 25, for instance, like I know, futurism and sort of looking forward I remember conversations with you then when you were sort of thinking about what that positioning starts to look like. And
Right.
what, who were you talking to then, and how has that changed even too? I mean, as you're starting to react to what Kurt was saying.
Yeah, no, so I want to double back a little bit on what Kurt's saying, because I am generally finding, and this is true of most, I feel like what other industries are hearing of Gen Z too, is they want work that is socially impactful. They want an employer, right, that is socially impactful. So then how can you not? So if you think about it, then really, how can you not be political? But if you look at everything is managing supply chain to some degree, and then anyways, and then you're touching politics. But then so I think it's been so when I was doing the practice innovation lab, that was 2017 2018. It was really I was at an interesting place in my life because I went back to school, got my MBA and MPA, and I was running this strategy group that was in a small to medium sized design firm. MK Think was, we were at our smallest, we were probably 12. At the biggest, while I was there, we were like closer to 40. But the strategy group was specifically started to look at services on both sides of traditional practice. So how do we stay further engaged with our clients? How do we get into those conversations when our clients are deciding like whether or not they even need a capital improvement project? So Jamie, we could talk to them about stuff like adaptive reuse rather than building new, things like that. And we were able to bill out at a higher rate than, because these are like school districts, library systems, universities that have a pretty standard way that they engage with architects. But because we were engaging in new and different types of services, we were able to structure our fee at a much higher rate than we could structure the architectural fee. And the strategy group helped carry MK Think through the recession because they were still getting paid for this type of client work, even though the building of buildings slowed down. And then I was like, well, why aren't we doing more of this?
Yeah.
And what does a different business model look like in order for us to not be so pulled in different directions when it comes to recessions, right? Every recession, we lose sometimes a generation of architects. When you're looking at the pipeline shortage, the talent shortage right now, I think it's everybody that we lost during the Great Recession, right? That like left the profession and didn't come back. So how do we set up a business model where we aren't losing so many people each time? So that was that conversation. The conversation has gotten a little bit with the pandemic, and changing how people work. Like that conversation continues to evolve because I think now the employee is placing a lot more demand on the employer, right? So now and this is why I feel like the architecture labor movement has grown a lot bigger within the last 2 years. And like Architecture Workers United is doing a lot more. There was that firm in New York that actually did have a successful union. I know for a fact that AWU is working with another handful of firms on doing this. So these conversations continue to happen. There's so many studies out there about culture and how we need to evolve and the culture and the practice, the culture of architecture, so people can see themselves having a career and being paid what they want. I know there are firm leaders out there that would love to give individuals childcare leave for like new adoptions and new children, but you can't do that like if you can't support somebody that's non-billable for an extended amount of time. Like, so we have to change the model. Like, you literally have to change the business model.
The business model is sort of the culprit in some of that. But I mean, I think you're right though. Is it the generational shift, and and what we're seeing with this generation, and even probably to some extent, generations prior that weren't necessarily ready to kind of have these kinds of conversations. Maybe we're thinking about them. I think you said sort of something poignant right there a minute ago, was that the labor force, is the employee is having very, very different conversations with their employer. And I think that dynamic, in and of itself is a disruptor. But one that probably this profession hasn't necessarily ever really encountered at this level before. And so it's like, and that to me is sort of, that's the thing I'm waiting to kind of see. I mean, I'm clearly in a different spot, professionally for myself, but I've also always been, a bit of a, sorry, Kurt, a shit disturber. I mean, that's my way of.
Why did you have to apologize to Kurt before saying that?
It's an inside joke. He's like,
okay.
Yeah, totally.
We were talking about, keeping it PC or, maybe rated PG-13.
Yeah. I mean, which is,
I feel like you can say that, like,
Oh, God,
like that falls under PG squarely. So
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we were inside joke.
Kurt's dog is in the room, so we try and talk in hushed tones on certain things. But no, but it's to me though, it's begging the question, or and sort of bringing it forward in a way that we're able to talk about, what does this look like? Let's have the conversation, as opposed to, oh, no, don't rock the boat. No, don't expect any changes. And for us, it kind of goes to that, oftentimes Kurt and I'll sort of lean back to, it's this big tent idea. There's plenty of other ideas out there, and there's plenty of people who've left the profession for their own reasons, this myriad of reasons. Like, some of them might have found answers leaving the profession that the profession could probably, utilize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a clear, just a clear point that I'd like to make is that, since we all have known each other so long, but I remember when, being on the YAF Young Architects Forum, and Evelyn was in that strategy position. But the point you just proved, I mean, there's no better point to say that, like, it carried a firm through the recession. Because I mean, I still have my own PTSD from the recession, because I feel like I, a lot of my peers are the ones that are not here now because they got laid off. I mean, I got laid off too, but somehow I clawed my way back into this profession. But so the point, and then moving to Slack now, right? And then using that same skill set and design thinking and strategy mind in a realm that maybe a lot of people wouldn't perceive an architect being the person to be there. But I think that just is a great example of how, like, if we want to maintain relevance, the definition of architect, or the traditional definition, I guess, of architect, needs to expand to where we can like I guess the easiest way to explain it is, now that I'm on my own, right? I get a phone call and say, do you do blueprints of a house? Right? I get asked, do you do houses or do you do commercial buildings? Right? Like, so deciding which silo that
And Kurt says
I want to
yes.
be in.
Yes.
And the answer
to
is yes.
all of the above. Yes.
So
including the
anyway,
blueprints.
Yeah, probably in the blueprints for a little while at least. Right.
But anyway, I just want to make that part clear. I think just just like how things, how well, anyway, I guess what you've demonstrated in your career path so far, and then similarly, or in Jamie's line of work, I mean, still being able to share. I mean, I think it all boils down to, like, sharing our knowledge with people, right? And
Well,
it's not just blueprints.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say, Evelyn, just kind of where you are right now with, with the company that you're in, and not just the role that you're in, but the fact that you have that architecture education, and are, are an architect. What has surprised you about your colleagues where you're working right now with respect to that? Has there been any sort of surprises or kind of unique conversations related to kind of yourself as an architect? I mean, I mean, the strategy and this futurist thinking is, is evident in any conversation we've ever had with you, but
Right.
But I'm sort of curious on the other side of things.
Yeah. So first of all, there's actually a lot of educational conversations. So there's entire groups of software architects in Salesforce, and I'm sure I would love to somebody have like a camera on my face when people introduce themselves for the first time to me as an architect, because I feel like I had that ingrained into me like so long, right? Like that you can't say you're an architect until you take all of your exams. So I'm sure I make this weird kind of face, and I always have to explain that I'm actually I'm putting my building architect hat on and not like my software architect hat on. So there's actually been a lot of conversations, oddly enough, with engineers about And to be fair, if you look even at software engineer, they co-opted the engineer term too, right? I mean,
Right.
um, but there's been a lot of like educational conversations to be had with my coworkers about there's an actual process to become a licensed professional, so that they were just unaware of. So now, like when they are doing additions to their San Francisco homes, they're like, oh, that's why it costs more to bring on an architect than it is to like work with a general contractor. Like they actually understand that difference. So that immediately opens the door to those those type of conversations. I think, they, and then on people that I work more closely with, they appreciate kind of the perspective that I bring. Um, I would say that if you were to change the language around the value that we are bringing to these organizations, that we're essentially systems thinkers, right? Because if you think about all of the different systems that go into the building that have to work together to make the building work, that's essentially what I'm doing, but it's not necessarily building. It's like I'm designing the system to support a better employee experience. And that takes a lot of different things. That and takes your HR team, that takes the biz tech team, that takes how we support learning development and career growth. And I'm looking at all of those different systems and how does it create a better employee experience. So I think once they work with me, then they're like, oh, I see how you're bringing that different perspective to the table, and then they're like, oh, that's like the architect in you. But that comes out more after having some type of working, I think, relationship with me. But then they always like are like, don't you just like care about the building? And I do have to sometimes say, like, I care about our offices, but
Right.
so much more. And that's the interesting thing, right? Like I get to do all the employee change management not control is not a good way, but to influence the behaviors and the spaces that we build, versus like how many architects actually get to do that about that spaces they design. Like we hand it over,
Yeah.
and then it might be the behaviors that happen in that space might never like come to, it might be what the leadership wished would have happened, but because they didn't go through the change management to actually make that happen, we don't, that's an area we don't have any control over. And then they're like, the building's not performing the way it should be. And it's like, because nobody taught you to open the windows to implement the passive, heating and cooling system. So it's, yeah.
Well, and that influence and sort of the brokering of that, I think, is really, special. I mean, Kirk talks about sharing, and I think that's probably where the two of us started this podcast for ourselves, was just this idea of, we've always been of the mindset in our own careers and then sort of with our own friendship of just sharing stuff. And it's not rocket science. There isn't any like intellectual property kind of, concerns. It's sort of sharing those kinds of experiences and reactions and the things that we learn, or the questions that we're asking, like, not even knowing what the answers are. And sort of the things that we're thinking about. So when you say that about the systems and how people might, kind of work as an organization, or kind of and envisioning those things, I can really appreciate that. That really resonates with me. I mean, because I think as a designer, you're, the way like I try and work with younger members of my team, who younger, maybe in age, but more in experience, where the thing that I'm trying to impart to them is just this, we are trained to try and synthesize a lot of pieces of information and imagine what those realities can be. And that's not something that everybody can do without some level of training, and maybe even some level of instinct too. There's an aptitude probably, to it as well. But that doesn't mean that we can't share that experience with the people that we're working with, or working for. And being able to do that. And it sounds like you're even getting a richer involvement in that, because you're able to really share that, with it's sort of you're working with a lot of folks who aren't architecturally trained, and then that in and of itself is probably a rich experience.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, what I've loved about the profession or I love about work in general is like everything is a learning opportunity, right? So, constantly learning.
I echo that though. I totally agree. I love learning things in in architecture or in general, right? Just finding out something that I didn't know before. And
So before we let you go,
oh yeah,
like we haven't done any sketches, and that is, it is the Coffee Sketch Podcast.
It is a sketch podcast. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
So
Sometimes we skip over the coffee way too quick. Usually it's the coffee we skip. But Kurt does have some sketches. We have one that we would love for you to just see and react to. And
is that the AIA building?
Yes.
Wow, that was fast.
Well, I was on the building committee last year. I was actually they didn't put me on this year, and they didn't realize that when I signed up, we didn't assign terms to the AIA. And they're like, "Oh, we thought you were on a 2-year term," and I was like, "That's news to me." But anyways, sorry. Yes, AIA building with a very prominent symbol on the oh shoot, what's that building called again?
The Octagon.
The Octagon. Yes, I should have known that.
Yeah, no.
It took me a while too. Jamie, this is a Jamie sketch, so yeah, no worries.
No,
you're missing the stairs on the main entrance to the courtyard. You have it all fenced off, Jamie.
Yeah, I kind of fenced them off. But yeah, no, I think what it was sort of, and I appreciate you sort of it sort of jumping out to you what it was and what the building was, because I think one of the things that this sketch, I mean, it's clearly this sort of political aspect of things, and sort of a statement piece, but reason why I brought it up was that Melissa Daniel had tweeted out some things. I was listening to your episode 109, and so it just all sort of connected in Jamie's brain. But this sketch is one where I love Christo. I love Christo and Jean-Claude, the artists, and wrapping buildings in sort of a temporary kind of way. And so that was sort of the impulse here, was sort of wrapping the Octagon in a shroud for a moment in time, because I think that whole space in that building and then the headquarters behind it is sort of a really unique piece of DC. And so yeah, I tried to capture at least my own kind of creative.
Talk about architecture. I mean, that served as the White House at one point, right? So
right, I forgot that, but there you go, full circle.
That's okay. Yeah, so I mean, so what is your favorite thing because of your time in the profession? What is your favorite thing in DC?
Oh, my favorite thing in DC.
You thought I was going to say San Francisco, but
the ironic thing is I've probably been to DC more than I've been into the city since the pandemic. I don't have to go into the office. No, that's probably not true. I've been going into the office a little bit more often, but I don't have to go in to the office. Favorite thing in DC. For a while, and it's not necessarily the Lincoln Memorial itself, but for a while, the board, and I've spent a long time on the board. So my most recent stint was as treasurer, and then before then as at-large director. But there's a handful of us that would do a morning walk to the Lincoln Memorial and back, and it was more I mean, the memorial itself is great too, but it was also kind of the procession, and the mall is always such like a rich place to be, with so much history in and of itself, as like a space that has a lot of history. But did you know that in the bottom there's a little exhibit in the bottom of the Lincoln Memorial that you can access, and there is a picture, a hand-drawn sketch like this, Jamie, of I think it's the current president, somebody very high ranked in politics, bestowing the AIA gold medal on an individual.
Oh, wow. Now I have a rabbit hole to go down. This is great.
Wow.
And I'm sorry I don't remember any of the names of the gold medal
That's okay.
receiver or the actual bestower, but there's like a little piece of AIA history in that little exhibit under the Lincoln Memorial that not a lot of people know about. So
no, that's fantastic. Because I mean, like you said, I mean, and like Kurt's reaction to this building, the Octagon was the White House during the War of 1812. When the White House burned, and so, and what I didn't realize at the time, but I just sort of got fascinated with this building and kind of its position. And talked to friends who were not architects who live in DC, and they're like, oh, I finally realized that your AIA headquarters is in DC and it's this building, but the building in front of it is so fantastic. And they were raving about the history of that site, because they were more on the kind of the history kind of it. But yeah, I didn't realize sort of when the AIA even was established, when they bought the building, like the Octagon was the headquarters, like was the original, like, headquarters. And so I thought it was sort of one of those situations where you become stewards of a property and kind of the preservation aspects of it, which is often the case. But yeah, it's sort of, there's a beautiful history of these places and spaces that I think that's the thing that's always sort of drawn us to them, is sort of the stories. And like you said about the mall itself, I mean, that procession and that space, I mean, how do you capture that in a sketch? It's an experience. So
yeah, definitely.
So do you still sketch?
Do I sketch? I've never been a really good sketcher, but that's also why I don't think I ever really did well in traditional practice, frankly, was because that was never my architecture. I love the process of making, but if I were to be in a firm right now, it would need to be a firm large enough where I could essentially be the equivalent of the COO, or the direct, like the principal of operations, and that would be kind of the space I operated in, or somewhere on the construction management side or administration side. But I also don't like the technical aspects of getting, like, there are people that really geek out on the technical aspects, and I understand that. I'm just not one of them, so I think they should also manage the construction and administration, and not necessarily me. But I don't know. I know my lane, and I'm not a sketcher.
That's okay. Yeah,
but I'm a big fan of all of Jamie's sketches on Instagram. Only I haven't been on Instagram lately, which is why my likes have fallen off. But when I am on Instagram, yes.
Well, I mean, like we were saying before, is like the sketching for us, and even, I mean, the impetus for this podcast was that the two of us wanted to sort of share our thoughts and share our experiences, and it's the banter, but it's also, the sketches doing that. And it's not certainly not about perfection. And it's, it's about sort of drawing other people into the conversation. And if we can do that where you're enjoying them, awesome. Like that makes me feel really, that touches me. And those are the reactions that I really appreciate. I mean, because when someone says, oh, I was watching I was looking at your sketches, I really liked them. And it's like, wow, okay. I'm sort of doing them because it helps me think.
Right.
I'm really only here for the
maybe a little
outtakes.
therapy too, but you know.
You're here for the outtakes. I think my equivalent of Jamie's sketching is writing, and I write a lot.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say, yeah, we're not here. We don't. What's the word? You know, put down anybody for no
Discriminate.
sketches, or no discrimination.
No, there's no gatekeeping.
But yeah,
with
your
this.
writing is
Yeah.
excellent. I mean, you've written for Architect magazine and others. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure you've written so much. Plus, you've built your whole platform of practice of architecture as well. And so the yeah, just like Jamie said, it's the thinking through the process,
Yeah.
and it has various outlets of creativity.
Well, and
Absolutely.
so Evelyn, just I was just going to say is, thank you for
Oh, thank
joining
you.
us, and and for, I mean, just sort of sharing what you do. I mean, but also sort of sharing how you approach it. I think if is there anything else that you want to kind of share with us and our audience? I mean, because I think that it's. I mean, you're talking about the practice of architecture and disrupting it, a lot, with your colleagues, but I think that there's a lot of similarities to the things that we sort of talk about on ours. But I think that the interview part of yours, you guys do really, really well. So thank you for being patient with Kurt and I.
No. This is fun. I mean, I would, Jamie, I would just hope that your audience is as open as the two of you are about kind of alternative paths and how we bring those voices back into the fold. Because I think, and I don't know if we said this before we started the recording or not, but I think absolutely the people that kind of left, they went through the same they went through the same torturous education that we did, and just because they stepped off that path doesn't mean that their love of architecture
Right.
has suffered or has is any less. So even if they find themselves in different fields, I think they are our strongest allies and advocates if we let them be, right, rather than kind of seeing them as outcasts. So
Well said. Thank you.
Cheers to that.
Yes. And with that, I think there are some hungry people.
they're running around. We have a subfloor, so I can it's, I mean, we don't have a slab on grade, so when my kids are running through the house, like, you can't not hear them running through the house.
Oh,
But yes, they're I'm sure they're interested in dinner sometime in the near future. Yeah.
well, we shouldn't let we shouldn't get in the way of that. So I will pitch it to the outro and let you go. So thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks. Well, I get to see both of you in San.
Oh,
sorry, I
there's
could have
the
asked that
outtake.
after the outro.
All right.
Are you both
I
coming to
can.
San Francisco?
Yes, we're both going to be
Yes.
there. Yeah.
And we're gonna take this show on the road.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
No,
Pitch it to the outro.
that is the perfect, like, for this
Oh, that's
three-person
going right on.
stream.
That's going out there.
Yeah, that's Kurt's favorite part. Finding those good
Thank you
outfits.
so much for that. Oh, it's a reward.